All right. My name is Chelsea Anderson. I am a certified prosthetist orthotist and a PhD student at the University of Colorado in the United States. And I'm going to talk about the development of a shared decision-making resources to determine the first prosthesis design between prosthetists and new prosthesis users. I'd also like to thank the CDT for this opportunity to share our work today. I have no conflicts of interest to disclose. Okay, so we know that both psychosocial and physical outcomes for people after lower limb amputation are poor when compared to people without amputation, with documented reductions in strength and walking activity and challenges with patient dissatisfaction and prosthesis abandonment. All of this is possibly influenced by the underinformed patient expectations for what they can realistically accomplish with a prosthesis. To address these poor outcomes and clinical challenges, shared decision-making is a solution that aims to improve patient satisfaction and adherence to care and misalign patient expectations and that overall patient health outcomes. Shared decision-making is where clinicians and patients share the best available evidence when faced with the task of making a decision, and where patients are supported to consider options in order to achieve informed preferences. We decided to apply this approach to prosthetic rehabilitation. But the challenges in providing a prosthesis is that design decisions are really complex. There's several different parts that go into a prosthesis, including the suspension, the socket, the interface, and components like knees or feet. But existing resources for choosing one option over another is oftentimes lacking, opinion-based, or absent entirely. And patients with amputation are also unaware that these various decisions are taking place, leaving large gaps in our care processes. So the purpose of this work was to describe the development process of a shared decision-making resource for the first prosthesis design to be used by both prosthetists and new prosthesis users. And I also want to go over key features of this resource. There were 4 main steps to this exploratory mixed methods project. We started off with a qualitative project to define the scope and the purpose of the decision support resource. And once we had identified what was going to be in the resource, we did a literature review on the available evidence surrounding those key findings from that first step. Then we put it all together to draft a decision support prototype. And then we tested that prototype for accuracy, usability, and comprehensiveness with a separate group of prosthetists and prosthesis users. In the first step, we conducted an exploratory qualitative study to examine the decisional needs of prosthetists and new prosthesis users for making prosthesis design decisions. We had 6 focus groups of 38 prosthetists and individual interviews with 17 people with a new lower limb amputation who were either in the process of receiving or actively using their first prosthesis. We did semi-structured interviews and analyzed all transcripts using directed content analysis. Our team identified 4 themes that came from the interviews. The first theme was around the complex communication needs. Both prosthetists and prosthesis users describe this abundance and complexity of information. And depending on the cause of amputation, it's not uncommon for people to be struggling with managing their health and recovering from very complicated, complex systemic health conditions. And ultimately, prosthesis users recognize how everyone's communication needs are different. They often discussed the importance of understanding their own communication preferences in order to set the pace for this information sharing about prosthetics. The second theme was the need for support in identifying personal values associated with prosthetic design decisions. Prosthetists really emphasized this challenge with how many of their patients had difficulty articulating their goals and values for using a prosthesis beyond their immediate desire to walk. Prosthesis users also described their personal need to identify things that were important to them through self-reflection on their priorities. And both groups expressed a need for support when initiating a more extensive and focused reflection on a prosthesis user's personal values associated with prosthesis design, ideally earlier in that rehabilitation process. The third theme centered on the importance of experience for a new prosthesis user to achieve informed preferences for a given option. Prosthetists and new prosthesis users talked a lot about their current methods for developing preferences on prosthesis design options. And they found things like seeing photos or videos or show and tell and even peer support were really beneficial for developing preferences for the different design options. However, most people really emphasize how that physical experience with actually using the option in their personal environment is kind of the gold standard for getting to informed preferences, things like manufacturer trials or actually testing out and using their first prosthesis. Finally, the last theme was understanding this big picture of the prosthetic prescription process, which really was important for prosthesis users to actively participate in decisions and to understand the implications of those decisions. New prosthesis users frequently brought up their uncertainty about decisions that go into prosthesis design and when those decisions are being made. So they knew they were getting a socket change because their limb volume was changing drastically and shrinking down, but they were really uncertain about whether or not other parts of their prosthesis, like suspension or components, could be changed at those times. That understanding of the progression of care was really important and helped to reassure prosthesis users that if an initial option wasn't working out, they could change it at one of those future decision points. So where do we go from here? Our findings have taken a bit of a detour from some of the more traditional shared decision-making research that tends to focus on a single decision with a more finite list of potential options. So we conducted a review of the evidence on each one of these themes. And we really kind of focused in on a survey evaluating preferences for communicating and participating in health decisions, an outcome measure that utilizes images of activities to identify goals for rehabilitation, methods to achieve experience or informed preferences in prosthetics. And then at the University of Colorado, this concept of a shared decision-making roadmap came out in our search for groups. And it was really applied to groups who had really complex health conditions such as Parkinson's or dementia, where the decisions are drawn out or multiple happening at different points over time. So that shared decision roadmap turns out is actually a really good fit for prosthetic design decisions, where the prosthetic process can be mapped out for a new prosthesis user, something that breaks down the different phases of getting a prosthesis, when potential changes happen, and when people can anticipate future decision points. In developing this prototype, we used that decision map concept as a foundation for embedding concepts from our qualitative work, such as a survey and questions for both prosthetists and new prosthesis users to identify their communication preferences when they go in to work with prosthetists for that first appointment on prosthesis design. We also included a values activity that we developed to help a patient identify their personal goals and values that feed into prosthesis designs and then prioritize those values accordingly. The decision prototype included resources for achieving informed preferences, like a list of questions for a new amputee to ask about prosthetic design options that they might be considering, or outlets and methods for gaining experience with certain prosthetic options. And then a prosthetic process map where the key decisions are laid out in the prosthetic journey, something that can kind of illustrate that process and what kind of decisions need to be made at the beginning and later points throughout their prosthesis care. And that all in order to provide anticipatory guidance in the prosthetic decision-making. We took this prototype and alpha tested it with a group of experienced prosthetists and prosthesis users, following suit with the process for developing decision aids outlined by the IPDAS. Through that alpha testing, we evaluated the prototype for accuracy, usability, and comprehensiveness with a group of experienced prosthetists and experienced lower limb prosthesis users. We had the expert working group members rate the prototype on the Likert scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most acceptable, usable, and comprehensive. By the final round of revisions to the prototype, the average scores across both groups were 96% for acceptability, 93% for usability, and 96% for comprehensiveness. Finally, in our future work, we anticipate rolling this decision support resource out to test for the same things in the clinic setting with real patients and working prosthetists. So I'd like to acknowledge our team and everyone behind this work, and also provide my references and my contact information. Thank you.